72 hours. 17 children rescued, all because of a crumpled piece of paper handed over by a 10-year-old orphan. That soldier, he didn't just shake a town to its core. He made an entire nation stop and take a hard look at itself. But the real question is, what did he see on that note? And what made him incapable of walking away? It had no name, no address, just a desperate plea scrawled in shaky handwriting. No one noticed, except him, and in the 72 hours that followed, a quiet stranger waiting for a bus became the nightmare of a hidden system that had lived in the shadows for years. The small Arizona town was still cloaked in darkness when the clock hit 4 a.m. The Greyhound bus station sat silent, with only a few scattered figures curled on cold plastic seats, wrapped tightly in thick coats. No one spoke. No one made eye contact. There were no honking horns, no bus announcements, just the low, constant hum of flickering fluorescent lights. Caleb Morgan pulled up the hood of his sweatshirt and clutched a hot coffee cup from the vending machine. The steam drifted up from the lid and brushed his face, but it didn't help. It wasn't the cold. It was the emptiness in his head that still hadn't cleared. He was only 35, but the way he sat head resting gently against the back of the seat, shoulders slumped, he looked like a man who had lived through 2 lifetimes, one in America, one in war. The fighting was over, but the images clung to him like smoke stains on old armor. Caleb had just finished a 3-month therapy program in Tucson. The doctors had suggested he return to his old hometown someplace with trees, open space, maybe even a fresh start. He wasn't sure he was ready, but at least this morning he'd made it out of his room. At his feet sat a worn black backpack, its edges frayed and still bearing the dusty red lines of the desert. In his jacket pocket was a bus ticket to Winslow departure time, 5 a.m. He'd arrived at the station by 3:30, too early. When he closed his eyes, just for a second, he heard it a faint shuffle, not hurried, careful, cautious, like someone trying not to be noticed. Caleb opened his eyes. No one stood in front of him, but his coffee cup had shifted slightly, and his right jacket pocket felt heavier. He reached inside, and his fingers brushed something, a piece of paper folded into quarters, crumpled, stained with smudged ink. A tiny gesture, but it clenched his chest with instinctual urgency. He unfolded it. Under the station lights, he read the pencil-written message, uneven, weak handwriting. Please save my friend. Being kept. No name, no date, no signature, just a cry for help. And below that, a rough sketch. An L-shaped building, a stairway leading underground, an arrow pointing toward it. Caleb's brow furrowed. He ran a fingertip over the edge of the paper, feeling the deep creases. This wasn't its first time being handled. Someone had held it for a long time, possibly for days. He looked up. A few people were still scattered across the station, heads down, eyes glued to phones or drifting off in sleep. No one was watching him. But then, he noticed it. The east exit door was ajar, and a small figure darted past it, slipping into the alley next to the building. Gone in a blink. Caleb shot to his feet. "Hey!" No answer. He ran to the door, but by the time he reached the edge of the sidewalk, there was nothing left, just cold wind blowing straight into his face. Outside was a dark, empty street, no cars in sight, and a narrow alley littered with garbage and stained brick walls. No trace, no footsteps, no one. He walked back to his seat, picked up the paper, and read the line again. Please save my friend. Nothing else. No request for money. No plea for food. No desperate appeal for pity. Just one clear message: save someone who's being held. Caleb sank into the bench, eyes locked on the hand-drawn map. It could be a kid. It could be a prank. Or maybe someone unwell. But then a strange feeling crawled up his spine, a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. It was instinct, the kind soldiers carry long after the war is over. The kind that's honed from reading notes, even worse than this one, in victims' pockets, on bombed-out walls, or clutched in the hands of someone trying to leave behind a clue before dying. And this time, he had time. He was alive. He was home. There was no reason to walk away. Caleb pulled out his phone and took a picture of the paper. Then he folded it carefully and slipped it into the inside pocket of his jacket. He leaned back against the bench. His eyes moved up to the station clock, 4:17 a.m. 43 minutes left until the bus departed. He could get on that bus, ride back to Winslow, and go back to the new normal his doctors had outlined. Start fresh, eat clean, tend to his garden, drink tea, keep a journal. Or he could figure out where that map pointed and who left that note behind. A truck rumbled past on the road, headlights briefly cutting through the fogged-up glass of the bus station. In that instant, Caleb caught his own reflection, his face steady, eyes focused, no more tremble. No one had assigned him this mission, no weapon, no orders, no backup. But somewhere, a child needed help, and he was the only one who read the letter. Caleb stood, swung his backpack over his shoulder, and stepped out of the station. Dawn hadn't broken yet, but something already had. Caleb left the bus station while it was still pitch dark. He didn't look back. He didn't hesitate. His steps weren't fast, but they were steady. The piece of paper stayed tucked inside the inner pocket of his coat, like a silent reminder. You're the only one who knows. He didn't go back to Winslow. Instead, he hailed a local taxi, a beat-up silver sedan, with a peeling Sunnytown cab logo on the door, and studied the hand-drawn map again along the way. "Where to?" the driver asked, eyes meeting his in the rearview mirror. "Town police station," Caleb replied, his gaze fixed on the note. The driver nodded. "No questions. Good. This town used to be home, back before everything changed." He remembered every street, every row of trees, even the old barbershop where he'd gotten his last haircut before flying out to Afghanistan. But when the taxi pulled up in front of the faded 3-story brick building with the worn-out sign reading Winslow Police Department, Caleb felt like a stranger. He walked in. The main lobby was empty, except for a young officer behind the front desk, sipping coffee, eyes glued to a computer screen. "Excuse me," Caleb said. "I need to report something urgent." The officer looked up, brows slightly furrowed. "Yes? What is it?" Caleb took the paper out and laid it flat on the desk. "I received this earlier today, from a child at the bus station." The officer glanced at the paper, looked up, then back down. "And what is this supposed to be?" "A cry for help," Caleb said firmly. "Someone's being held somewhere. Might be a child. I don't know exactly where, but there's a sketch. There are real signs." The officer sighed, leaning back slightly in his chair. "Sounds, odd. That bus station gets a lot of transients. Could just be a prank." Caleb tightened his hands slightly, steadying his voice. "I served in the military. A cry like this isn't a prank. No child wastes their breath or their handwriting for fun." "You're a veteran." "Sergeant, United States Marine Corps, 3rd Division Helmand, Kandahar, Fallujah," Caleb replied crisply. The officer raised an eyebrow, then nodded an instinctive gesture of respect. But he gently pushed the paper back across the desk. "We appreciate your vigilance, but if there's no victim, no clear address, then "You're not going to file a report," Caleb cut in. "We can log it into the system, but there really isn't enough to launch an investigation," the officer replied, trying to keep his tone neutral. Caleb took back the paper and folded it carefully. "All right, then I'll find out myself." "Listen," the officer added as Caleb turned to leave, "it's not that I don't believe you, but after the war, a lot of folks come home carrying a heightened sense of alertness. I only say this because I'm concerned for you." That sentence, like a thorn, straight to the chest. Caleb didn't answer. He just looked at the officer for a moment, an expression that said he'd heard that line 100 times before, then turned and walked out the door. Outside, dawn had broken in a pale light. Caleb climbed back into the taxi and pointed at the map. "Take me to the riverside, where the old brick factory used to be. Behind the plant on 6th Street. "You sure?" "Nobody goes out there," the driver said cautiously. "I'm sure," Caleb replied. "Wait out front for 20 minutes. If I'm not back by then, call the police." The driver swallowed hard and nodded. The abandoned brick factory sat at the end of a dusty road, chain-link fence collapsed, knee-high weeds covering the path. The red walls were crumbling. A rusted iron door hung crooked. The air smelled of mold and old metal. Faint footprints marked the dirt, stained with dry oil. Caleb put on gloves, pulled out his phone, turned on the camera, and stepped inside. It was dark. Only a dim light filtered through holes in the corrugated roof. The ceiling was high, the metal beams exposed like bones. A corridor led downward, what looked like an old storage area. In the far left corner, he saw the first clue. A torn piece of fabric, reddish-brown, caught on a rusted iron latch. He bent down. It wasn't rust. It was dried blood. Across the room, the dusty cement floor showed small, clear footprints, child-sized, maybe a size 12. Some prints were deeper, possibly from running, or being dragged. Caleb followed them. They led to a bent window grate, part of it broken, like someone had tried to escape. He raised his phone, recording every detail. With each step, his heartbeat grew louder, not from fear, but from something eerily familiar. It felt like patrolling the abandoned compounds in Fallujah, where even the smallest sign could mean saving a life. He crouched. In a crack between the wall, a black ink stain clung to the concrete. It looked like someone had tried to write or draw, then scrubbed it off. He took a photo, then bam, a loud sound echoed from the floor above. Caleb stood instantly, back pressed to the wall, eyes scanning the ceiling. No further sound. Could have been the wind, or maybe not. He slipped out fast, walked back to the taxi. "Everything okay?" the driver asked, visibly nervous. Caleb raised a finger to his lips, signaling for silence. He still wasn't sure if he was being watched. Back at the police station again. This time, he asked to speak with a superior officer, the commander, but only an older officer came out to meet him. His eyes were weary. "Mr. Morgan," the man read the name from the paperwork. "I heard your statement this morning. I know you've served, but maybe you're blowing this out of proportion, like a soldier might." "Don't," Caleb said quietly. "Don't use that excuse to look the other way." The officer sighed. "We just want you to be okay. Don't let the past make you see things that aren't there. I just saw a fresh red wound, real footprints, and a broken exit gate. That's not a ghost," Caleb replied, his voice low, but firm. The officer fell silent, then slowly shook his head. "We'll make a note of it, but there's really not enough basis for a full investigation." Caleb stood. His eyes met the officer's, cold and clear as ice water. "Then I'll investigate, on my own." He turned and walked away. No one stopped him. The sun was out now, but the wind was still cold. Standing outside the precinct, Caleb pulled out his phone and replayed the footage from the factory. A torn piece of clothing, tiny footprints, bent metal bars, a red wound. He didn't know who had left the note. He didn't know who my friend was. But every detail, every small sign was pointing in the same direction. That child wasn't lying. And if no one else would care, he'd be the one to go back into the dark. The wooden house where Caleb was temporarily staying sat quietly on the outskirts of town, tucked beside the edge of the forest. It used to belong to an old comrade of his, now lent back to Caleb while the man underwent treatment. Inside, the soft yellow light from the kitchen cast a dim glow over the scratched wooden table. Caleb sat there, spreading out all the photos he had taken from the brick factory. The images from his phone included a small, dried red wound, tiny footprints stamped into the concrete floor, and a bent metal bar. In the center of the table still lay the piece of paper the little boy had silently handed him early that morning. "Please save my friend. Being kept." Caleb hadn't slept. He stared at those words for a long time. Questions spun through his mind without answers. Who was the child? Who was his friend? What did being kept mean? And most of all, who was behind this? He stood up, put on his jacket, pulled on his gloves, and double-checked the flashlight batteries. Then he stepped out of the house. It was 1 a.m. Returning to the brick factory for the second time, Caleb didn't go through the front. Instead, he circled around the side of the building, where, in the blueprint, there was a small note scribbled, "Go down, left door, safe." His flashlight beam swept across the bottom of the wall. Weeds had grown thick, nearly covering everything, but he still found it a short metal door, like a basement hatch, coated in dust and moss. Faint, child-sized handprints smudged the latch, as if someone had once tried to push it open from the inside. Caleb gently pushed the door. It opened with a dry, grating sound. The musty air hit him immediately years-old mildew, rotting fabric, and something faintly sterile, like antiseptic, but colder, hollower, almost like a hospital that had long been abandoned. The staircase descended in rough concrete. Every step he took echoed sharply off the ceiling clack cutting through the silence of the night. The basement wasn't completely dark. Faint light seeped through cracks near the roof, but most of the space was drowned in shadows. Caleb switched on the flashlight. Its beam swept slowly across thick walls, marked by patches of mold and green moss. Along one of the walls were chalk drawings, uneven and shaky. Stick figures, smiley faces. Lines that wobbled, drawn by an unsteady hand, drawn by a child, no doubt. Some sections of the wall were scratched deeply, as if someone had once tried to claw their way out with bare hands. In the farthest corner of the room, Caleb spotted a metal box. It wasn't large, about the size of a toaster oven, covered in a thick layer of dust. On the lid was an old strip of duct tape, and drawn at the center was a black cat's eye, simple but unsettling. Caleb knelt down and carefully peeled off the tape. The lid popped open. Inside was a neatly arranged stack of documents. Right on top were 4 black and white photographs of children, blurry but clear enough to see their faces. One sat curled in a corner of a room. Another had their hands tied behind their back. A third child faced the wall, trembling. All 4 of them faces frozen in fear. Caleb set the photograph down on the nearby metal table. His hand trembled slightly. Beneath the photo was a nylon-covered notebook, worn but intact. The pages were handwritten, the lettering neat and legible. There was no title on the cover, but inside, the entries read, December 2nd, 4 ready, Gate 7, December 8th, white van, driver number 3, drop-off at 4 a.m. December 10th, Shipment number 6 delayed. Temperature issue. December 11th. Moved to house number 3, marked as Haven Kids. Caleb flipped to the last page. A small flyer was stapled there. The Haven Project. Every child deserves a safe home. A charity organization according to the flyer. Centered on the flyer was a logo, an image of a roof sheltering 2 small figures. Caleb stared at the words, Haven Project. The name wasn't unfamiliar. He'd seen it on a church bulletin board before, heard a few friends mention it, thought it was just a place that took in orphans. But here, it sat among photographs of terrified children and a logbook tracking shipments like they were property. He slipped the entire folder into his document bag. His flashlight swept the room once more, searching for anything else. Then he turned, ready to leave. Just then, his flashlight passed over the back hallway corner, and someone was standing there. A figure, tall, thin, dressed in dark clothing, not moving, not speaking, just staring directly at Caleb. His heart pounded. He gripped the flashlight tighter. "Who are you?" he asked, voice steady. The person didn't respond, didn't flinch. Caleb took one cautious step forward. "I said, who are you?" No answer. Then the figure slowly turned away and walked silently into the shadows, disappearing without a sound. Caleb immediately ran after him, flashlight aimed dead ahead. But all he found was a dead end. No one there, no trace left behind. He stopped, strained his ears. All he could hear was the soft drip of water and the pounding of his own heart. Back home, Caleb locked the door carefully. He pulled the curtains shut, turned off the living room lights, left only a dim desk lamp on in the kitchen. He spread the documents across the table, pinned each photo to the whiteboard. Next to the Haven Project logo, he wrote, "They're not working alone." At the top, he added one more line. If one child sends out a call for help, others might never get the chance. Finally, he picked up the photo he had snapped hastily before leaving the basement, a shadowy figure standing still in the far corner. No clear face, no clear outline. But Caleb knew one thing for certain. Someone knew he had come back. And someone was watching. That night, he sat by the window. He didn't sleep. Not for a second. A week had passed since the night Caleb discovered the metal box in the brick factory's basement. A week since he touched the first real evidence that this wasn't just a case of a missing child. It was a system, a dark network, hiding behind the facade of a charitable organization. He had returned there twice more, searching for additional traces. But the basement had been locked. Every sign erased. It seemed someone knew he had been there and had cleaned up right after. Caleb had no names, no one to question, no first-hand witness, just cold photographs, scribbled words, and an intuition that only grew sharper by the day. If he didn't find the child who had written that note, everything would be swallowed by silence. One evening, while stopping by his usual corner donut shop for a cup of coffee, the waitress in a loose apron suddenly spoke up. "You hear about that kid? Some strange boy's been hanging around the night market the past few days, sleeps under one of the vendor tables, doesn't talk to anyone." Caleb looked up. "Which market?" "South Market, behind the old bus depot, the place with all the produce stalls at night. Folks say he's hiding from someone or running from something." He nodded his thanks, asked nothing more, but in his mind, it was clear it could be him. That night, Caleb put on his old army jacket, pulled his cap low, and walked toward the night market. It was just an open lot, lit by bare white bulbs, with a dozen or so makeshift stalls. The air was thick with the smell of vegetables, dried fish, and the mingled sounds of shouting vendors and laughing children. He didn't rush. He walked slowly, scanning each stall, peering into every shadow beneath the tables, behind foam boxes, under heaps of burlap sacks. Near the end of the row, he stopped at a large produce stall. Underneath the table, there was an old blanket curled into a bundle and a small body lying motionless, like stone. He knelt down, speaking softly. "Hey, kid." The blanket shifted. A pair of eyes opened dirty, alert, terrified. It was a boy, maybe 10. Thin, hair matted, face streaked with dirt. "What's your name?" Caleb asked. The boy didn't answer. He just stared. Caleb stepped back slightly, slowly unzipping his jacket to reveal the camo fabric beneath. "I'm a soldier, retired. I saw you at the bus station." The boy's eyes lit up, still wary, but not retreating. "You gave me that note, didn't you?" Caleb asked gently. The boy gave the faintest nod. Caleb said nothing more. He extended his hand, palm open, the same gesture he used to make in war zones with frightened children. "Come on out. I won't hurt you." Silence. Then the blanket stirred again. The boy crawled out, trembling, bare feet, bruised knees, dirt-covered hands. Caleb took off his jacket and wrapped it around him, and without a word, he led the boy out of the market. At a small roadside diner, Caleb ordered the boy a bowl of hot soup and a glass of milk. The child sat across the table, both hands wrapped around the bowl, head lowered as he ate carefully. Not rushed, not speaking, but every movement told the story. He hadn't had a proper meal in days. Caleb waited until the boy had nearly finished before asking, "What's your name?" "Jace," the boy replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "How old are you?" "Almost 10. Do you have any parents?" Jace fell silent, then shook his head. "You escaped from the brick factory, didn't you?" The boy nodded. Caleb looked him straight in the eye. "Is there anyone else still being held?" Jace bit his lip. His eyes dropped. "Yes, a lot. All kids like me. No one comes for them. They keep us in the basement. It's been a long time." "Has anyone ever been let go?" Jace shook his head. "No one ever came back. Some kids got called by name. Then they were taken away in a van at 4 a.m, a white one." Under the table, Caleb's hands clenched into fists. "How did you get out?" "One night it rained hard. The basement flooded. I saw the grate on the drain pipe had come loose. I crawled through it. No one saw me. I hid for 3 days, then wrote a note. But nobody even looked at it." He looked up. His eyes were red, but there was a faint glimmer of hope in them. "Until I saw you at the bus station. You were wearing a coat that looked like the military. I thought, maybe you wouldn't run away." Caleb gave a small nod. "How long were you at that place?" Jace clenched his fists. "Since my mum died. I didn't have any other family. They took me to an orphanage, but no one asked any questions. They signed papers and drove me away. At first, I thought I'd have food, a bed, but I didn't." "No?" Caleb asked softly. "No one cared. One time I had a really bad fever, lying on the cold floor all night. They just gave me water, then made me get up and work, cleaning, washing dishes. Then a few weeks later, a truck came. Some strangers came in. They said I was being moved to a better center, but there was nothing better about it." Caleb said nothing. His chest tightened, not from pain, but from a warmth laced with sorrow. Someone still believed in him, if only because of an old coat. After the meal, Caleb took Jace home. In the living room, the boy was given a warm bath and changed into clean clothes, some old outfits Caleb had kept from when his younger brother was still alive. Caleb handed him a pencil and a few sheets of blank paper. Draw a map of the place where you were kept. Anything you remember. Jace nodded. His hands trembled, but his lines were steady. Each detail came to life. The basement, the staircase, the small holding rooms, cameras, the iron door, the drainage pipe. He even remembered the markings on the walls, L3, G7, and a symbol of a roof sheltering two small figures identical to the Haven Project logo Caleb had seen on the box. Caleb stared at the drawing, eyes fixed. "You did great," he said softly. "Really great." Jace looked up. "Are you going back there?" Caleb answered without hesitation. "Yes, but this time I won't be going alone." In the living room, the boy was given a warm bath and clean clothes, some old hand-me-downs Caleb had kept from when his younger brother was still alive. Caleb handed him a pencil and a few blank sheets of paper. After bringing Jace home, Caleb couldn't sleep. The things the boy had shared back at the diner weren't the kind of details a child could make up. The locked rooms, the cameras, the steel doors, the codes, the children who were called by name and never came back. All of it matched what Caleb had seen in the basement of the brick factory. And that flyer with the Haven Project logo was no longer just a symbol of charity. It was a mask. The next morning, Caleb packed up everything and got Jace out of town. He didn't know how long it would take before the people behind it all started cleaning up the evidence. But he knew one thing for sure: staying there was too dangerous for Jace. The cabin they arrived at was an old place tucked along the edge of a pine forest. The owner, Travis, was a fellow soldier from Caleb's past, someone who'd been pinned down with him for 3 days during a firefight in Kandahar. These days, Travis lived a quiet life, worked night shifts as a security guard, and kept the cabin for anyone who might need a place to lay low. Travis didn't ask many questions. When he saw Caleb get out of the car with a child in his arms, he simply handed over a key and said, "Room 4. Soundproof walls. Fridge still works. Treat it like your own." Caleb gave a nod of thanks. That was all. They understood each other without needing words. Inside the cabin, after Jace ate a little and fell fast asleep on the old sofa, Caleb opened his laptop. He pulled the memory card from his phone and transferred everything to his computer. Photos of the basement, notes from the metal box, Jace's recorded testimony from the night before, a rough layout of the holding area sketched by Jace. Then he opened his email and typed in a name he hadn't revisited in 7 years: Linda Reyes. Linda had once been a war correspondent embedded with Caleb's unit during a hostage rescue mission on the Syrian border. One day, she was hit by a stray bullet. Caleb had risked his life to drag her out of the line of fire. Since then, Linda had considered him one of the few people she could trust without question. The email was brief. "Linda, I don't know who else to turn to." Attached is evidence of what may be an active child trafficking ring operating in Arizona under the guise of a charitable organization. Name: Haven Project. Evidence is attached. I have a living witness. We need you to investigate the funding links and help bring this into the light. Caleb. He hit send and waited. In the living room, the boy was bathed in warm water and changed into clean clothes, old shirts and sweatpants Caleb had kept from when his younger brother was still alive. Caleb handed him a pencil and a few blank sheets of paper. Near noon, Linda called back. She didn't waste words. Her voice was low, urgent. "Caleb, I've seen everything. It's real." "I know," he replied. "I've heard of the Haven Project. It's registered in Delaware, but no one's ever dug into it. Everything looked too clean, too by the book. But the documents you sent, no one's ever had that kind of evidence. Can you trace the funding? I'm starting now, but listen, Linda's voice dropped. Part of the donor list includes names of some local politicians. I don't know exactly what we're poking at here, but if I'm right, this isn't something the town police can handle. Just help me get this out, Caleb said. I'm worried they'll move fast. Where are you now? Somewhere safe, but I don't know for how long. Be careful. Don't let anyone follow you. I won't. The call ended. Caleb turned off the phone and removed the battery. That afternoon, Jace woke up. He ate a little more, then sat quietly staring out the window, where sunlight filtered through the blinds. Caleb sat beside him, gently rubbing the boy's shoulder. You okay? Jace nodded, eyes fixed on the window pane. Has anyone come looking for you? Jace shook his head. No one knows I'm here. You sure? The boy nodded again, but then his eyes froze. His hand gripped the edge of the seat tightly. Caleb noticed it instantly. He turned to follow Jace's gaze, and his heart slammed in his chest. Outside, just inches from the glass, beyond the curtain, a man was standing perfectly still. His eyes stared through the narrow gap in the blinds, straight into the room. No knock, no movement, no words, just watching. Caleb jumped up. He pulled Jace into the back room and locked the door. Then he moved fast to the rear exit, the emergency door that opened into the woods. He grabbed his backpack, shoved in essentials and documents. We're leaving now, he said. Take this. He handed Jace a flashlight. Where are we going? Out of here, into the woods. I know the way. What about Uncle Travis? He knows how to reach us. He'll be okay. Jace held Caleb's hand tight. He didn't cry, just trembled. They crossed into the forest as dusk fell. Caleb kept Jace close, ears tuned to every rustling leaf. Behind them, the motel remained silent, but Caleb knew. If someone had come all the way out here, their time was running out. When they reached an old wooden shelter, once used as a ranger post, Caleb stopped. He lit the fireplace, checked the door locks. They sat close, their breath still uneven. Jace looked at him and whispered, That man, who was he? I'm not sure, Caleb said, but he's not someone good. Jace was quiet for a moment, then asked, barely louder than the wind, Aren't you scared? Caleb looked at him, eyes steady. Yes, but not for me. For who? For your friends. The ones still trapped there. Jace lowered his head, then gave a slow, quiet nod. Caleb clenched his fists and stared into the dancing flames. We'll go back, not just to find your friends, but to end this. Caleb pulled the car to a stop beneath a thick canopy of trees. Ahead, a narrow dirt road snaked its way deep into the forest, winding, unmarked, and nearly swallowed by the woods. The only things they had to go on were Jace's hand-drawn map and the boys' fragmented memories. You sure this is the place? Caleb asked, eyes still fixed through the binoculars. Jace, seated in the passenger seat, nodded without hesitation. I saw it from the basement when they loaded us onto the truck. A black house with a big chimney and an oak tree on the left. Caleb looked at the forest in front of them. That was it. They left the car behind on a patch of dry grass and continued on foot, weaving through an old, overgrown trail. After about 10 minutes, Caleb raised his hand, signaling Jace to stop. Less than 100 yards ahead, a black-painted house appeared, nearly swallowed up by surrounding trees. No lights, no nameplate, no vehicles parked outside, as if no one lived there. But Caleb saw something that told him otherwise. In the corner of the porch, an infrared camera was mounted. Beside the window, a motion sensor had been cleverly hidden inside a fake tree trunk. And near the front door, a man in civilian clothes sat on watch. He wore an earpiece and occasionally glanced toward the woods. There was no way he was just a regular homeowner. Stay here, Caleb said, gently pulling Jace back behind a tree. "Don't move from this spot, you hear me? I want to come with you. Not this time. If anything happens, I need you to run. Get back to the car. There's a phone in the glove compartment. Call Linda. She's the first number in the contact list. She'll know what to do." Jace gripped the straps of his backpack, lips pressed tight. "I'm not leaving you. I'm not letting anyone take you either," Caleb said firmly. "Now stay low. Don't move." Caleb waited until night had fully settled in. The man on watch stepped inside for a few minutes, probably a shift change. That was Caleb's moment. He slipped around the left side of the house. The skills he'd learned in the military were now the only thing keeping him from being seen. He crawled low along the wall, avoiding the camera by timing its movement precisely. The side door was locked, but the padlock was rusted no match for a simple hairpin. Inside, the house was cold and dark. Not a single voice, just the steady hum of a small fan. Caleb made his way quietly down a set of stairs leading to the basement, the kind you'd see in an old brick factory. There was no doubt anymore, this basement was a holding cell. 4 small beds lined the walls. On the table sat a brown leather notebook, open to reveal rows upon rows of handwritten entries, names, ages, ID numbers and dates labeled as "transfer out." Next to it, a laptop remained open, still unlocked. Caleb plugged in his USB to back up the data, a habit he'd never broken. The screen displayed a sprawling Excel spreadsheet with columns labeled "Child Code Name Receiving Country Transfer Date. Status. Confirmed. Pending." In the corner of the screen was a small grey logo. Haven Project. Safe Homes Worldwide. A bitterly ironic slogan. Just as Caleb was about to shut the laptop, click a soft sound behind him. He spun around, startled. A tiny hidden camera was recording from the corner of the room. He had slipped up. Quickly, he shoved the USB into his jacket pocket, pulled out his flashlight, and backed toward the door. But as he reached the stairs, the alarm screamed to life. A shrill siren tore through the silence. Red lights flashed rapidly. The basement door slammed shut behind him, thankfully. He'd already crossed the threshold. Caleb bolted out the side entrance and ran toward the woods. Behind him, the porch lights flared on. A man burst out of the house, radio in hand, yelling something unintelligible. Caleb didn't look back. He knew he only had seconds. But then he froze. The hidden spot where they'd stashed the car, Jace was gone. His eyes scanned the shadows, heart pounding. "Jace!" A faint rustling came from the bushes. Someone was dragging Jace away from the car, a man in a grey jacket and a covered face. His hand was clamped over the boy's mouth, trying to pull him into the trees. "Stop!" Caleb shouted, his voice cracking like thunder through the stillness. The man flinched, but he was too slow. A loud crack. He staggered, dropped to his knees, clutching his leg. He wouldn't be going anywhere. Caleb rushed forward, yanked Jace into his arms, holding him tightly. "Are you hurt?" Jace trembled, but nodded. "I couldn't scream." "It's okay. I'm here now." Behind them, footsteps approached. Caleb gripped the boy's hand and took off into the woods, circling back the opposite direction to avoid being tracked. The car was no longer an option, but Jace's safety came first. After 15 grueling minutes weaving through thick branches and underbrush, Caleb finally reached an old ranger station he remembered from a past terrain patrol. They slipped inside, locked the door securely, and collapsed against the damp wooden wall, catching their breath. Jace sank to the floor, arms wrapped around his knees. That was so close. "Yeah," Caleb said, peering through the narrow window slit. "But this time, they know exactly what we're holding on to." He reached into his chest pocket and pulled out a USB drive, holding it up for Jace to see. And we've got something powerful enough to blow their whole operation wide open. Jace looked up at him, eyes shining with trust. Caleb gave the boy's shoulder a firm squeeze. Now, it's time we come up with a bigger plan. The church sat quietly in the woods, its grey stone walls covered in moss, the wooden roof warped by time. A few panes of the stained glass windows were broken, but the wooden cross above the pulpit still stood plain, weathered, yet steadfast. Father Gregory, a salt-and-pepper-haired man, with broad shoulders and a lean, sturdy frame, pushed open the door as he saw Caleb walking up with Jace. He didn't ask many questions. He simply opened the door and led them into a small room behind the sacristy. "No one's come here in a long time. It's quiet and there's a steel lock," he said, setting a cup of hot tea down on the worn wooden table. "What do you need, Caleb?" "Time, and a quiet place to open something that could bring this whole town to its knees." That night, Linda Reyes arrived. She wasn't dressed like the evening news anchor. A denim jacket, hair tied back, backpack slung over one shoulder, and with her was a young man wearing glasses, her personal hacker, Micah. They didn't say much. Linda looked straight at Caleb. "You still have the hard drive?" Caleb nodded. "In my chest pocket." "Then let's begin." Micah opened his laptop, connected a few cables, and lines of code began streaming across the black screen. Caleb sat still, his eyes locked on the tiny USB now plugged into the machine. Just 10 minutes later, Micah froze. "There's encryption, but not too complex. Looks like they didn't expect someone with military training to know how to back up data like this." Linda looked up. "What's inside?" Micah typed a few more commands. The screen shifted to a folder directory. One by one, the names appeared. Child logs, confirmed. Transfer, video. Donor accounts. Field, surveillance. Caleb clenched his fists. Opened the first folder. In the small room of the church, the four of them sat in silence, eyes fixed on the screen. A series of images appeared. Portraits of children, ages ranging from 6 to 14, names, heights, ID numbers. "There are 42 of them," Micah whispered, "all marked as transferred. Not a single one has a follow-up record." Linda straightened up. "Are there any videos?" Micah opened the second folder. The first clip, a girl around 9 years old, curled up in the corner of a dimly lit room. A man's voice came from behind the camera. "What would you say to your family if they asked about you?" The girl trembled, then whispered, "I'm living with relatives. In a good camp. They're teaching me things." The next clip. A metal door swung open. 2 men loaded a blindfolded boy onto a truck, then slammed the door shut. No one said a word. No one looked away from the screen. Caleb took a deep breath, trying to keep his voice steady. "Open the funding folder." Micah clicked. A spreadsheet appeared. Names of international charities, fake email addresses, wire transfer amounts. Several entries were marked in red. "High priority, government affiliated." Linda frowned. Some of these names look familiar. That's the humanitarian group that won an award at last year's Global Summit. Micah scrolled down. At row 47, Caleb suddenly stood up. Name, Anthony Claymore. Title, Mayor of Meadow Creek. Note, supports the Haven Project, Transitional Childcare Facility Initiative. Linda glanced at Caleb. "You know him?" Caleb nodded, his face ashen. "I taught that boy when he was 12. History class, middle school. He used to be the kid who stood up to greet every teacher, always raised his hand to answer. And now he's funding the export of children overseas. Sometimes." Not every child grows up the right way. The room grew heavy with silence. Father Gregory quietly brought over more water for everyone, then stepped into the corner and began reading scripture without a sound. Linda closed the laptop. Her voice was low, but firm. "We can't keep this buried any longer." Caleb looked up. "What are you going to do?" 8 a.m. tomorrow. I'm airing all of it on the main network, the military channel, and a live stream online. Jace, sitting close to Caleb, trembled slightly. "They'll know. They'll come after us." Linda looked at the boy for a moment, then placed a hand on his shoulder. "You don't have to hide anymore. Tomorrow, the whole world will see who they really are." That night, Caleb stepped out into the churchyard, standing alone beneath the dark sky. No stars, just the cold wind and the distant call of an owl. He thought about the children whose names no longer appeared on any record, the ones no one was looking for anymore. Children reduced to ID numbers, transported like cargo. He thought about the student he once knew, now part of the darkness. And he thought about Jace, the first child, to break the silence, to hand him a crumpled piece of paper that had started it all. By morning, everything will change. Everything started with a faint knock so soft it was as if someone had merely tapped their fingertip against the back window of the church. Caleb opened his eyes immediately. No need to check the clock. It was still before dawn, and any sound at this hour was never a good sign. He didn't turn on the light, didn't make a sound. Quietly, he moved toward the window and gently pulled back the old curtain. Outside, a thick fog blanketed the grey stone courtyard. But through the mist, 3 shadowy figures stood beside an unmarked grey van. One of them stepped close to the window, his face completely covered by a black scarf. He didn't knock, didn't move, just stood there, staring straight in. Caleb backed away. His heart pounded hard. They had found them. There was no doubt now. He rushed to the corner of the room and shook Jace awake. The boy sprang up, as if torn from a dream where falling asleep meant dying. "Stay calm. Something's happening. Get your coat," Caleb whispered. Linda was already awake. She gathered the hard drives, maps, and every document into a cloth bag. "They got here sooner than we thought." "They must have tracked us since the data extraction," Caleb said, with a tight nod, lips pressed into a line. "We're out of time." All 3 of them bolted down to the basement, a narrow old escape route Father Gregory had shown Caleb on his first day. It led straight into a patch of forest behind the church. There were no goodbyes, no embraces, just shallow breaths, hurried footsteps on cold stone, and the shaky beam of a flashlight. But Caleb stopped at the final step, turning back to look at the elderly man standing in the rear doorway behind them. Father Gregory, his hair silver like ash, holding an old wooden crucifix. He didn't retreat, didn't rush to lock the door. He just stood there, watching them go, eyes steady. Caleb opened his mouth to speak, but before he could, Gregory spoke first. "We can't save them all, but if we can save just one, the Lord will still smile." He lifted the crucifix, pressing it to his chest, as a final blessing not for Caleb, but for the boy clinging tightly to Caleb's hand, the child he believed could still grow up, still laugh, still believe in the light. The back door of the church closed right after that, and from above, Gregory turned and strode toward the front hall where the shadows were closing in. He carried no weapon, but he had time, and sometimes all it takes is one person willing to stay behind for the others to get far enough away. Inside the narrow tunnel, the weak beam of a flashlight flickered against the damp stone walls. Every footstep echoed like a ticking clock, pushing them deeper into a race against time. Jace tripped on a jagged rock and fell hard. He let out a cry, quickly stifled, but blood was already seeping through his pant leg from his knee. Caleb didn't hesitate. He bent down and scooped the boy up into his arms. Jace trembled, but clenched his teeth and said, "Uncle Caleb, if they catch me again, don't come back, okay? Number." "They won't catch you." "Not again," Caleb said firmly, holding the boy tighter against his chest. Linda ran alongside them, hearing every word. She glanced back. In the dim light, the sight of Jace's red, bleeding knee made her stop for just a second. Her face turned pale. The cold from before now seemed to crawl straight into her spine. But it wasn't fear. It was rage. It was pain. It was that familiar, helpless feeling she hadn't felt in years, one that came from being a journalist who'd witnessed too many victims and had been powerless to help them. She tucked the hard drive back into her coat, zipped the pocket closed, and said with finality, "We're not airing this. It's too late. I won't make that boy a media target." Caleb looked at her. Linda continued, "We hand everything over to the FBI. No one gets to see the boy's face, not even my colleagues." Caleb simply nodded. No arguments. Because for the first time, he saw something different in Linda's eyes. They were no longer the eyes of a reporter chasing a headline. They were the eyes of a temporary mother who had just realized that a child's life should never be the cost of fame or exposure. When they emerged from the tunnel, the forest behind them was still cloaked in darkness. A black SUV was already waiting. Linda had called in a favor from a trusted former colleague. No one spoke as they climbed in. Caleb sat in the back, Jace resting his head on his chest, eyes shut tight. The car didn't turn toward the news station as originally planned. They crossed the state line under cover of night. By 6 a.m., just as the doors to the FBI field office opened, they walked in like people carrying a live bomb without a timer. Linda placed the hard drive and a thick file folder on the reception counter. She pulled out her credentials and slid them across to the still groggy staffer. "My name is Linda Reyes, former federal investigative partner. I specialize in tracking shell organizations that cover for humanitarian crimes. These files contain proof of an international child trafficking ring aided by local officials. This boy is a living witness. If we don't act now, more children will disappear permanently." She didn't raise her voice, but every word cut like a blade. The clerk glanced at her badge, then the drive, and quickly began typing. Within 3 minutes, an internal affairs agent appeared, accompanied by 2 personnel from cybersecurity and security. Linda followed them into a side room and began the formal report. Lists of code names, smuggling routes, fake funding accounts, and most critically, a video pulled from internal surveillance footage showing children being forced to lie and taken away under the cover of night. Meanwhile, Caleb sat in the waiting area. Jace was curled against his chest, still breathing fast. A doctor stepped out from the emergency care unit and bent down gently. "He needs to be examined right away. There's a wound that's red and swelling, and we'll need to run a few psychological assessments as well." Caleb turned to Jace. The boy shrank back slightly. "It's okay," Caleb reassured him, lowering his head to touch his forehead to the child's. "I'll be right here. I'm not going anywhere." Jace gave a faint nod. His small hand clutched Caleb's shirt until the medical staff carefully guided him away. The waiting room fell silent. Caleb leaned back and looked up at the FBI emblem mounted on the opposite wall. For the first time in years, not on the battlefield, not in uniform, but here, in this cold, administrative lobby. He felt like he was finally doing the right thing. A door opened. Linda stepped out, her face tense but steadier than before. She gave Caleb a firm nod. "They're launching a special investigation, and they want you to sign on as Jace's temporary guardian." Before Caleb could respond, another door down the hall opened. Jace was brought back in. His knee was now bandaged, but his eyes stayed fixed on Caleb. "So, what are you to me now?" the boy asked, his voice barely a whisper. Caleb didn't answer right away. He tightened his hand gently on the boy's shoulder, eyes still locked on the shield hanging high on the wall. "I'm the one who won't leave you. Ever." That morning, the FBI building stirred awake like it was emerging from a long hibernation. A female agent named Alex Monroe, hair neatly tied back, was dispatched to meet Caleb and Linda shortly after the preliminary data review. She didn't waste time with pleasantries or hesitation. After a brief handshake, Alex gave Caleb a firm nod. "We're moving in, but we need you to come with us." Caleb rose to his feet, his eyes turning serious. "As long as we get those kids out alive." 3 hours later, an 11-member rapid response team, led by the FBI, was ready to depart the base. Linda stayed behind to watch over Jace in a secured, protected area. The boy didn't say much. He just drew maps of the basement and the side corridors he could still remember. When he handed Agent Alex the last sheet, he said only one thing. "The last room. There's an old fridge. Back when I was still there, they kept food for the grown-ups in it. I think they're still using it." Alex glanced at the drawing and gave a slow, solemn nod. "That's enough. This kid's already a hero." The task force rolled out at dusk. They wore bulletproof vests, communication earpieces, and rode in 2 unmarked SUVs. Caleb sat in the passenger seat of the lead vehicle, eyes fixed on the window. The suburban forest, home to the so-called Black House, came into view again, not with the weight of isolation this time, but with the force of truth and the law behind him. That night there were no loud shootouts. Instead, it was a silent, flawless operation. The team split into 3 groups, one to create a distraction at the front, another to cut power and disable cameras from the rear, and Caleb's group went straight for the basement. Caleb was the first to step through the narrow doorway leading down. The damp, musty smell still lingered. But now, this was no longer a secret place. As the beam of his flashlight swept the room, small faces emerged, 3 children, likely between 6 and 8 years old, huddled in a corner, wide-eyed and frozen with fear. "We're with the FBI," Caleb said gently. "You're safe now. No one's going to hurt you anymore." One of the children, a little girl with curly hair, slowly stood up, trembling. You dress like the others, but your voice isn't like theirs." Caleb's throat tightened. He knelt down and opened his arms. "I'm here to take you home." As Caleb carried the girl out of the room, the response team had already secured the entire house. 6 adults were taken into custody, 2 of them nurses who had previously worked at charitable organizations. They offered no resistance. One of them even smiled, as if confident he'd walk free again. But this time, with video footage, documents, eyewitnesses, and now survivors, there was nowhere left for him to run. The FBI set up a temporary rescue camp just outside the forest, and ambulances quickly arrived on the scene. Caleb stood amid the chaos of flashing red and blue lights, his eyes following each child as they were lifted onto stretchers, each small body wrapped in a blanket. Alex walked over and handed him a bottle of water. "We got 17 of them out." Caleb nodded. "It's still not enough." "No," she agreed, "but it's a start." Back at headquarters, Caleb opened the door to the secure room where Jace sat quietly, still drawing. The boy looked up, and his eyes lit up as if he'd just heard a hopeful melody. "You saved them, didn't you?" Caleb stepped closer and rested a hand on the boy's shoulder. "You'll see your friends again." Jace lowered his head and added a few final strokes. The drawing was complete, now a small house nestled in the forest, glowing with warm, yellow light. But this time, there were no bars on the windows. A few hours later, after leaving the government office, they turned into a special care center where the children rescued from the Haven project were temporarily staying. The door opened. It was a small space, but filled with laughter, awkward, hesitant, but real laughter. Jace stepped inside. For a moment, he froze. A curly-haired boy, Liam, looked up. Then their eyes met. "Jace?" Jace ran over. The two embraced tightly, as if time had been severed and was only now being stitched back together. Then came a little girl, Laurie, with a bandage on her arm. She ran to them too, eyes glistening. "We thought—" "You didn't make it," Laurie whispered. Jace choked up, then pointed toward Caleb, who stood quietly near the door. "It's thanks to him. He really came back." Caleb simply smiled. No words needed. But when Jace turned back and reached out naturally, firmly to take his hand, Caleb knew. He wasn't alone anymore. 3 days after the raid, a light rain fell over the city of Tucson. In a small room inside the Office of Child Protective Services, pale fluorescent light fell across Jace's narrow shoulders as he sat beside Caleb, clutching a brand new teddy bear, the first gift he'd ever felt safe enough to keep. Across the desk, a female caseworker flipped through a file. "We've confirmed. There are no surviving legal relatives who can take custody of Jace," she said gently, but clearly. "This qualifies as an emergency adoption case." Caleb nodded. "I've already prepared the paperwork, and if anything else is needed, I'll provide it." The woman paused for a moment, then gave a soft smile. Former Sergeant Caleb Morgan, 35 years old, clean legal record, stable housing, steady income, and most importantly, personally requested by a 10-year-old boy to be his father. Jace smiled so lightly it seemed a breeze could carry it away. But to Caleb, it meant more than any medal he had ever worn on his uniform. The adoption signing was held privately, in a small room with glass walls. No flowers, no cake, no guests, just 3 people, Caleb, Jace, and the state attorney. On the table sat a simple form, bearing a new name, Jace Morgan. When the pen touched paper, Caleb's hand trembled just a little. He had fired weapons, saved lives, survived attacks, but he had never felt a responsibility as weighty as when he wrote 2 simple words, Father. After signing the papers, Caleb bent down and looked Jace straight in the eyes. "You're a Morgan now," he said softly. "You're my son too, and no one is ever taking you away again." Jace didn't say a word, but he wrapped his arms tightly around Caleb, the first embrace from a child who once believed no one would ever want to keep him. A week later, Linda Reyes aired the full investigative report on national television. Footage of the children's rescue, scenes from the basement, and an encrypted list of fake humanitarian fund donors sent shockwaves across the country. The local government's official statements were immediately met with public outrage. The town's mayor, a former student of Caleb's, was suspended pending investigation. Several charity organizations shut down overnight. The state legislature called for an emergency hearing to review the oversight and regulation of child-related non-profit funds. They called it the Morgan case. Caleb gave no interviews. He didn't need to. All he did was take Jace to his new school every morning, right on time. And before the boy stepped out of the truck, he always reminded him, "No one's ever going to hurt you again. And if anything happens, I'm right here." One October afternoon, as the sun dipped behind the Tucson mountains, Jace brought a drawing out to the backyard. In it, a man stood beside a child. Behind them was a yellow brick house with its front door open wide and warm light spilling out. Across the bottom, in wobbly handwriting, Jace had written, "I used to be a boy no one knew. Now I'm my father's son." Caleb said nothing. He just reached out and pulled his son close, his arm wrapped around the boy's shoulders the way he used to on the battlefield, not to shield a fellow soldier this time, but to protect something fragile. Something that had only just been pulled out of the dark. No more sirens, no more flashing red lights, just a home. And two people stepped into each other's lives as if fate had already written it in that crumpled piece of paper slipped into a coat pocket at the bus station that morning. There are children out there who are never called by name, never asked how they are, never awaited by anyone. But sometimes, all it takes is one person brave enough to stop, to listen, and to believe, and an entire life can be saved. The story of Caleb and Jace isn't just a rescue, it's a reminder. We live among millions of silent cries for help, and too often it's indifference that quietly kills hope. What do you think about Caleb's choice? If it were you, would you stop because of a crumpled piece of paper? Or would you walk on, pretending you didn't see it? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd truly love to hear what this story meant to you. And how are you doing? Is there something weighing on your heart that no one has noticed? If you need a place to let it out, please remember, there's always someone here ready to listen. Thank you for staying until the end of the story. I'll see you in the next video. Take care of yourself.